students, welcome to this massive open online course on Indian economy. And today's lecture will be on structural changes in Indian economy. Now, what are the objectives of this particular lesson which we'll be doing today? Number one of the objective is to understand what we mean by structural change in an economy. The second will be to understand the characteristics of this structural change in the economy. What are the major characteristics of change in the Indian economy? The third most important thing which we'll talk about are some of the proximate causes, maybe the reasons why the structural change which we are having is like that. What are the major reasons for having that kind of a structural change? Now, let's remember that an economy historically always undergoes some kind of a structural change. As you can see that when economies started historically, they were mostly agricultural economy. And then there were mundane industrial development which took place. Gradually there are innovations, there were inventions, and the economies moved towards more and more manufacturing activities. Along with manufacturing activities, there came more complications, more sophistications in the economic transactions, and you have different kind of services which came into being. It can be financial services, it can be telecommunication services, it can be travel services, all kinds of services, and you name it. And the number of services are increasing day by day, so to say. The major work on structural change was done by somebody called economist Simon Kuznets. He got the Nobel Prize later on. And the main work of Simon Kuznets was to take data from a large number of Western economies, Western developed economies, and to look at it and see how the structure of the economy changed over the world. And his findings later on is known as Kuznets' law, because it's almost all the Western developed economies followed that route. What was that? It was observed that initially the agriculture was the dominant sector. Then the agriculture lost its importance, and it was compensated by rise in industrial production and employment in the industrial sector. And then when the economies got more developed, ultimately the services sector came into being, and they took the lead role in creating jobs as well as in terms of share in the production. That's exactly what we mean by Kuznets' law. Now, is it that India also followed what is known as the Kuznets' law? How do we measure it? Say in case of India, we measure it either in terms of the total gross domestic product of the economy, which is the aggregate output which Indian economy produces in a year, the share of different sectors in that. The second one may be the share in the aggregate employment of different sectors in the Indian economy. And the third one is a combination of the two. So you can look at the share of different sectors in the productivity of labor, which is output divided by total labor force. So in other words, it's output per head, which can be a proxy of what we call per capita output or standard of living of a nation. Now, given this, how do we do the methodology? It's quite clear that either we go in one way is to just go by the shares of different sectors in the gross domestic product. Sometimes it's called gross value added, which you must have learned in your macroeconomics course, where we talk about value added and gross domestic product. Or you can do it in terms of shares in employment and productivity, as I just explained. Now, how is the structural change measured? One is the characteristic. One is how one can look at it. But after looking at it, how do you measure it? How much change has taken place? Now, this is done in two different ways. One is what we can say in terms of the per capita. The advantage is that some countries are big, some countries are small. So if you take the per capita, then it's standardized per head income. So large country effect is done away with in that way. So the way we try to do it, when we take the productivity, as I said, large country effect is done away with when we take the productivity, then either you can say how the productivity is changing within a sector due to various reasons. There can be, just within the sector there may be capital accumulation, so they are investing more in that sector, so productivity is rising. Or it may be due to technological change, or it may be due to some kind of proper allocation of resources within that sector. The other is that, and this is observed all over the world, that labor moves from the low productive sectors to high productive sectors, which is called migration of labor. So in that way, when labor moves from the low productivity to high productivity sectors, certain sectors grow and certain sectors shrink. So these are the two ways one can think about how the productivity of a country changes. And in terms of productivity, which sector or how the sectoral changes is taking place. Is it that within the sector most of the productivity change is happening, or it's between the sectors the productivity change is happening? That's how you measure the structural change. There is a formula which is given. A look at the formula. The formula suggests, and let me explain it, and this is a very common standard formula which you use to understand the change which we just talked about. It's the delta sign, all of you know, is the change. Y stands for the gross output of the economy. And then in terms of either gross output, and as I said, you can take it in terms of productivity too. So the first term says that it's the change in the productivity within the sector itself, delta YIT. That means within the sector, how it is changing over time. And sectors are then added to understand how much, one sector is comprised of, say, 30 production, different types of production. So add the total change in that sector by this formula, first term. Change in productivity in one particular, type of industry within that sector, and weighted by its share in the total of that particular sector's production, which is given by the omega term. The other is that the second term, you take the productivity of a sector in some periods, and then, in fact, it's normally, if you compare two different time points to see that structural change in that, you take the productivity in the last period, the end period, and try to see that how much is the sectoral share change. That means that sector's share in total, how much that has changed. That's given by the delta term, delta omega IT. That's the second term which we say. Now, what does it mean, this formula? The first term is the decomposition, is the weighted sum. As you can see, is the weighted sum of productivity growth within an individual sector, where the weights are the employment share of each sector at the beginning of the period. Structural change automatically means two periods. You are taking one period, comparing it with the period which comes later. So it's a change. Change means two time points have to be involved. So the first term is, take an initial time point and see in that initial time point to a next time how much change is taking place, say, within agricultural sector or within industrial sector. And the second term captures how much change is taking place because labor is moving out of agriculture and going to industry, or labor is moving from industry to services. Usually labor always moves from the low productivity to high productivity sector because they get more wage there. Now, this kind of theories which we get, that labor moves from low productivity to high productivity sector, is captured by certain theories, very well-known theories in economics, which you will do in your development economics course. Harris-Todaro model or Lewis model of development, which captures they have stylized model which says how this change takes place. Now, in case of India, there is a work which is done, and I quoted it here. International Labour Office, one economist who is working there, has an interesting way to do it. They said, I am talking in terms of a change from organized to unorganized sector. This unorganized sector largely may be in agriculture, because as you know, this is unorganized in the sense that all these industrial laws do not hold there. And unorganized sector can be in industry too. Unorganized sector can be in services too. So what he did, he tried to see the structural change, especially like a country in India, which is a developing country, how much change is taking place from the unorganized sector, which is low productivity sector, to high productivity organized sector. So the change captured is how much change of the structure is within that particular sector and how much change is there when you move from one sector to the other sector, all in terms of organized and unorganized. Unorganized low productivity, organized high productivity. Now, going by this is general table. Again, look at the table. In the table, as we can see, in case of India, it's almost like a 10-12 years data which the economist has quoted. Agriculture share is almost stagnant. Agriculture share has gone down, not stagnant. Agriculture share has gone down from 29.4 to 18.5. Manufacturing share is almost stagnant, 17.1 and 17.4 over a period of 12 years. Construction is also similarly not changing much. But look at the services, 37% to 49%. So obviously services sector has outgrown other sectors. And this is not Kuznets' law. Kuznets' law says agriculture will decline, industry should go up. Then comes industry going down, services go up. But India jumped from agriculture to services, bypassing the manufacturing or the industrial sector growth. And that's aberration. That's a change. That's a different from Kuznets' law. And again, going by the employment share, go by the employment. Same period, 2000-2012. Surprisingly, there is a difference. The difference is agricultural sector maintaining its supremacy in terms of employment. But the manufacturing and services sector, roughly, they are maintaining their employment at the old level. So in terms of production, services have taken up the production share from agriculture, not the manufacturing sector or industry. But in terms of employment, still lots of people are employed in agriculture. They are stuck there. They are not really going over to either industry or services. So in a sense, Kuznets' law in what is observed in the Western developed countries is not being observed in India. Students, this is a major conclusion, major thing which bothers economists. Why did it happen this way? And we will not give the total answer to that, but we will try to capture it in some dimension so that you have some idea what is happening. Now look at the table 3. In table 3, this formula which I used, don't bother about too much about the formula. We talked about the formula. The results are given within the sector. That means suppose you take sectors like agriculture and see how much change is going within the sector, not between sector. Structural change talks about mainly between sectors, agriculture to industry, industry to services. What the economist has done here of the International Labour Office, how much is within one sector and how much is between. Kuznets' law is between, not within. But see at the figure, percentage share of change, 67.4% change is within the sector and 32.6% change is between the sectors. How did they measure it? They measured it in terms of unorganized and organized sectors. Not so much in terms of agriculture industry, but how much is organized, unorganized? Because Kuznets' law, the main driving force is people move from low productivity to high productivity sector. If that is so, then people should move from unorganized to organized sector. It's not happened in India. Unorganized sector retained its predominance. People were just moving within, agriculture, within unorganized industry, but not from the unorganized sector to organized industry. So the structural change is like this. People are stuck in their own sectors for long, long time. They are not changing over. And that's a very important characteristics which we should keep in mind. So you understood the table 3 clearly, that as I said, the unskilled labor, mainly unorganized labor, were searching jobs within that sector. Can I have a little better option within agriculture, little better option within services, not changing from service to industry to service or agriculture to service. They are just trying to keep and stay within the sectors. That's the characteristic of India. So students, we talked about what, again, I repeat the thing because they may be a little complicated. What I said is there is change, but the change is happening within sectors and not between sectors. And Kuznets' law, which we talked about, observed in Western developed countries, in almost all developed countries, is change between sectors and not so much within sectors. Look at table 4 now. In table 4, as we said, there is change within sectors. What kind of change we are talking about? This is a Reserve Bank of India sponsored study done by a group of economists. And you can see that agriculture, for example, their share unambiguously went down 1982 to 2017. But look at the industry share. Industry share has not changed, but within industry, there are differences. If you look at the textiles, 3.7% share in 1980 has gone down to 2.1. But if you look at the chemical industry, it's just the opposite. It has gone up from 1.2 to 2.5. If you look at, say, the transport equipment industry, 1.4 to 1.8. So, some of the industries are having rise, some of the industries are having fall. Overall industry has gone down, a slight change from 26.9 to 29.3, with some rise and fall in between. And if we go a little bit further, if we look at this non-manufacturing industries, like some of the minerals and mining, non-manufacturing, their share largely has gone up from 9.4 in 1980 to 15%. So what I was telling you, within sectors, there are changes. Some industries are going up, some industries are going down. But does it mean that labor is moving from, say, manufacturing industry to services? A lot of labor is moving out from agriculture and going to industry? Not really. What is happening within the industrial sector, there is structural change which is going on. And if you look at the services, just look at the table once more. In the services sector, you see the financial services. Financial services, this is here, the financial services has gone up from 2.7 to 5.4%, doubling. If you look at the education, has gone up from 2 to 4.1%. If you look at the health services, it has gone up 2. So basically what is happening within the services sector again, some sectors are becoming more productive, some sectors are contributing more. So within services sector again, there are changes. Some high productive sectors are growing and low productive sectors are not growing. But the fact remains that there are so many changes within the, within the sectors like agriculture, industry or services. But if you look at the productivity finally, output divided by employment, not much change among the sectors. The sectors or the changes in productivity is limited within the sector. So within services, some sectors are growing, some sectors are falling. Within industry, some sectors are growing. In terms of productivity, some sectors are falling. So that's the predominant character of India's structural change. Not so much between different sectors the structural change is observed. So I have given another study that's in your handout. In that handout, we quoted a study from the Asian Development Bank, and they have a little bit more elaborate study in terms of what is called input-output analysis. More minute study taking more sectors in disaggregated fashion. So what is found in that, in terms of increase of value added, the agriculture sector, unambiguously the value added has gone down. In terms of employment, the change is not that much. But in case of industry and services, the value added share unambiguously has gone up. Employment share apparently also has gone up, but in services it is lot less, but in industry it's a little bit more. So, in a sense, what we can say that in terms of, if you go to 1980 and 2010, you will observe some little change in employment and some change in value added. But that does not mean a lot of changes are taking place, as if the low productivity sectors are going down everywhere and the high productivity sector is going up everywhere, and labor is mass is moving from low productivity to the high productive sector. That's the reason why the unorganized sector survives so much in Indian economy. They do not change over time because most of the low productivity jobs are occupied or captured by what we call the unorganized industry, unorganized services, unorganized labor, unorganized agriculture. And that's the reason, that's the main reason why the structure in India, just as Kuznets was saying, has not gone from the low productivity to a high productivity sector. Labor has gone from low productivity to high productivity sector. It's kind of a stagnant structure in terms of labor, in terms of employment has prevailed. And we defied Kuznets' law because we jumped basically from agriculture to services. Because it's a movement from one low productivity sector, agriculture, to kind of another low productivity sector, services, because industry is the highest productive sector, but labor has not moved to industry. Its share has not gone up. So basically, it did not follow the standards Kuznets' law which observed. So in conclusion, that's exactly what we, again, students, just remember, Kuznets' law of transition has not been followed. The standard labor movement theories of Harris-Todaro or Lewis type of model not exactly followed. And India, the most of the movement are within sectors, low productivity sectors remains low productivity, and people have moved within that sector from relatively low productive, a relatively higher productivity sector, but has not moved from one sector to other en masse. So unorganized sector has survived, they remain, and the low productivity, the structure clearly shows most of the changes, what has happened in our structure is within one sectors, and within low productivity sector it has changed, but not from low productivity to high productivity sector. So keep this in mind. That's exactly what you need to understand, that the structure of the Indian economy, why so much dominated by the unorganized sector, because that's exactly is reflected by what we just learned. And that is not something which most of the countries which have developed have followed. Thank you.